Well, I am absolutely delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast today is the Most Reverend Right Honourable Stephen Cottrell. And Archbishop Stephen is the Archbishop of York, the second most senior position in the church, which is a real joy for me to have Archbishop on, as this will be our 50th podcast and Godcast interview. Archbishop Stephen, it's lovely to welcome you. How are you today?
Oh, Alex, thanks. It's great to be with you. If I'm honest, I'm a bit zoomed out. I've had one of those days of Zoom after Zoom after Zoom. But before coming to speak to you, which is a joyful thing to do and a bit different from all the meetings, I've had a bit of toast and Marmite, so that'll keep me going.
Very good, excellent. Archbishop, if I can just ask you for quickly before we get down to the questions, your reflections on the weekend. That's been quite an emotional weekend for the country, hasn't it? And many people in the north regarding the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral. What did you make of it yourself?
Well, I think like most of us, although I've put it like this, I've not met anybody who hasn't been profoundly moved by, and in some ways, surprisingly moved. You know, many people have expressed to me surprise that they were so moved. And I think if I might make what I hope doesn't sound like too churchy a point, what I found myself thinking is the beauty of liturgy. That what was, I thought, so profoundly moving about the service was the restrained, almost austere dignity of the liturgy. And really, as Anglican Christians, we shouldn't really be surprised that liturgy works, that it's very, very beautiful, that it provides a space where we can bring, deep, deep feelings. But it is, and so I thought, so for me, I'm taking away the power, the beauty of liturgy. And I've kind of made a little promise to myself that I want to keep reminding the Church of England that this is our inheritance, our story. How did it happen that we lost confidence in one of the things which is our greatest treasure?
Yeah, I find it very moving, and I thought the Queen sat on her own was actually how it should be. Actually, I think it was just kind of replicating what was and has been happening up and down the country, that she was there on her own as many widows have been.
Yeah, I mean, I've not taken, I bet you've taken a lot of funerals in the last year. I've only taken a few, but I have taken some funerals in the past year. And they've been some of the most beautiful and yet the most heartbreaking I've taken in all of my ministry. And it's precisely because there's been, the bereaved widow or whoever it is in isolation, not even being able to hold be embraced by their family. And so I'm sure all of us, as we watched, were also remembering those other funerals we've been part of.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So you almost a year into the job. How's it going?
Yeah, well, it's a bit weird, but I am enjoying it. I'm a bit frustrated, if I'm really honest.
Right.
Because I found it hard I was the Bishop of Chelmsford, and I loved being the Bishop of Chelmsford. I really poured my heart and soul into that diocese. There's so much that didn't go how I wanted it to go, but I love the people, I love the parishes, I love the clergy, and so I'm carrying a bit of bereavement with me.
Yeah.
Not least because I left in the very first weeks of lockdown where we hadn't even really worked out how to do Zoom. So there was no farewell, really. And I think that's made me realise, perhaps this will be a theme in our chat, rites of passage are so important.
Yeah.
And I didn't really have a chance to say goodbye. So that was tough. And then coming to York, there wasn't really a chance to say hello, not like it would have been.
No.
So a bit of frustration, but also on the positive side, I think what an honour to be Archbishop at such a time for our nation, where I believe we've all had to come face to face with our mortality and our frailty, where I think there's great opportunities for the gospel, where I hope and pray that we will be reminded that prayer and service, these are the two things that we're called to as ministers of the gospel. And so I think there's been a bit of perhaps a kind of resetting of the compass of the Church of England at the moment around those basic things, to which we might now add, the beauty of liturgy.
Yeah. Did you ever think you would see the day, Stephen, when you would be the Archbishop of York, when you set out in your days of ministry? Just take us back to, your calling. What was that like for you?
Well, I've never had a proper job, is the way I usually describe it.
Yeah.
I'm the last of that generation where it was really, really normal to be ordained in your early 20s. So I was ordained deacon when I was 25, which, do the maths. That meant I started training when I was 22, went through the selection process when I was 21. I look back and think, oh, I was just a boy. I've got 3 sons myself who are all older than I am, than I was when I got ordained. And I look at them and think, goodness, that was me.
Mm.
And I've never liked that thing about, oh, people should get more experience before they're ordained. I've always resisted that, because wow, did I get experience as a young priest.
Yeah.
So I've loved being a priest. It's been a great life of adventure. I wasn't brought up going to church, so I came to faith. For me, coming to faith, feeling a vocation to ministry, all of that are all wrapped up together.
Mm.
But no, I thought I was going to be a parish priest. That was the life I thought I would live. So it came as a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, what were the challenges that were facing the church when you were ordained deacon? Were they talking about the decline of the church even back then, or?
Yeah. I think all my ministry, we've been, and we have to accept that we have been in numerical decline for a long while now.
Mm.
And the only good thing I can say about that is it, because I that's been the story from the day I was ordained. What I've stopped doing is thinking it's anybody's fault. Because I think it's been hard particularly for clergy who are, I don't think anybody means to make people feel like they're a failure, but sometimes you can end up thinking you're a bit of a failure.
Yeah.
When all you hear is the gloomy statistics about, all the things that haven't gone well. But I discovered quite quickly as a priest what I would describe as a call within a call, which is a call to evangelism. And so when I was a curate, I was asked to lead a parish mission at St Paul's, Tottenham, I've lost track of that church in London. It was a great Anglo-Catholic shrine parish, very, successful parish, hundreds of people at Mass on Sunday. And I was invited to lead a mission there when I was a curate, and I loved it. I didn't know what I was doing, but I loved it, and I learned. And then lots of invitations came in. And so for the first 15, 20 years of my ministry as a priest, I was developing this sideline. I didn't use the word evangelist then, because I come. If you've looked at the Sporting Life, Alex, and looked up my pedigree, what shaped my Christian faith is the Catholic tradition of the Church of England, and so the language we used back then was different. But I look back and see, yeah, God called me to be an evangelist, and so I led a lot of parish missions. And the big issues we were facing were the issues of decline, lack of confidence. There's the same things we're facing now. The other big thing when I was first ordained was a thing called Faith in the City, which was published, I think, the year I was ordained or just the year before. And that was a real challenge to the church to face some of the issues about urban poverty, regeneration, the withdrawal of the church from urban estates and what we used to call then inner cities. And that for me was always hugely inspiring, because well, just to tell you a quick story, when I thought God might be calling me to be a priest, I went to see my parish priest called Ernie Stroud, Father Ernie Stroud, a great priest. Went to see him, and he gave me 2 books to read. One of which was the biography of William Temple, one of my predecessors at York, and also the biography of a priest called Basil Jellicoe, who was one of the kind of 2nd generation slum priests in King's Cross in London. And I read these 2 books, and I found them very different books, very, very inspiring. And sometimes I think about my ministry, think I've never really got beyond that basic inspiration. William Temple with his great vision for the Christian faith shaping the whole of life,
Mm.
and Basil Jellicoe, this slum priest trying to make a difference in some of the poorest areas in the country. And that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be Basil Jellicoe.
Yeah.
But it didn't turn out that way.
No, it didn't. Can I just ask you to? You said something at the beginning of that little section there about you being called to be an evangelist. Now, a lot of people who watch the Godcast aren't what perhaps would be described as a church person or church people. So when you say I'm called to be an evangelist, just kind of put that in as simplistic terms for people who aren't churchy.
Yeah. Well, let me do it with a quick story. When I became a parish priest, my first incumbency, which was a church, St Wilfrid's, Chichester, which Chichester's pretty plush, but even Chichester has a council estate, and I was the parish priest for the council estate on the edge of Chichester. When I got there, I was the youngest first Sunday. I was the youngest person in the congregation. My wife was the second youngest, and there was quite a gap to the next person. And it was very clear to me on day one that lovely people, but what that church needed was not a vicar, but a hospice chaplain. They knew they were dying, and my job was to look after them while they died. And I can remember going back to the vicarage on day one, thinking, what have I come to? And I realized then and there that I had to rethink what my job was as a vicar. That I thought my job was to look after the church and teach them the faith. And I realized, well, if I do that, I'm going to be out of a job in about 10 years. So I realized my job is to share the Christian faith with people who are not yet Christian. So that's all evangelism means. There's a world out there of people who don't know about Jesus Christ. And I saw, in some ways, it sounds strange saying it today, because I think one thing we have done in the church is help clergy in their training and formation to realize that's a massive central part of the job. But it wasn't, I've been ordained a long while. This is 37 years ago. It wasn't then, not for me. So I had to rethink what I thought ministry was about, centered around not the people who did come to church, but the people who didn't.
Yeah. Thank you. The call to being a bishop, Stephen, was that? Just say, is it? I suppose, was it a surprise, or your name being thrown around, or what was happening?
Yeah, it was. Though I think if most bishops are honest, and I'll be completely honest with you, although it was a surprise, there's no question about that. I think I also was beginning to know that this could happen, because I started to realize that it's a dirty job that somebody's got to do. Somebody's going to be asked to do it. And I realized that the things I was doing, mostly through the mission work I'd done, I then had a national job. I then moved north lived in Huddersfield in West Yorkshire, served as an associate priest at St Thomas's Huddersfield, was missioner for the then Wakefield Diocese, and then had a national job with evangelism and mission across the Church of England. So I was kind of leading missions, teaching about mission, trying to encourage the church to be missionary. And I kind of realized, without realizing it, I'm in that sort of position where if they're looking for a bishop who's a, Catholic in their spirituality, outward focused in mission, maybe they might ask me. So it was kind of in my head as a possibility, but literally I just got a phone call one day out of the blue. And that was a big surprise.
Where did that come from? Because I often wonder when we say they might think, where did that call come from? Can you remember?
Oh, the actual phone call?
Yeah,
I can. I mean, though this is territory that I was the Bishop of Reading before I became the Bishop of Chelmsford. And about when it was 16, 17 years ago when I became a bishop, a man called, wonderful priest called Geoffrey John was appointed to be the Bishop of Reading, and then stood down, had great pressure to stand down because he was open about his sexuality. I supported Geoffrey John, I'd written to support his appointment, but he stood down, and therefore a vacancy emerged. And the then Bishop of Oxford, Richard Harris, who I'd never met, people often said, "Oh, well, how did you know Richard Harris?" I never met him. He phoned me up and said he'd heard about me and said, they were looking for a kind of Catholic-minded mission priest. That's why they asked Geoffrey John to do the job, and that's what he was looking for. So he phoned me up. He didn't offer me the job over the phone, but he phoned me up and said, we're looking for a new Bishop of Reading. Your name has been suggested to me as somebody who might be the right kind of person. Can we meet? So we met. We chatted. I suppose it was a sort of an interview. And then a couple of weeks later, I was formally offered it. There was no real process. Now, nowadays, it's unlikely it would happen quite like that. There's nearly always some sort of formal interview process. There's some sort of paperwork. But again, I think I was one of the last of the bishops who was just appointed in a very casual, ad hoc way.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm sure people will find that interesting to hear.
I like to think as well it was the call of the Spirit.
Absolutely.
And I also want to say, I love being a bishop. I mean, there's days which are awful, but I love being a bishop.
Yeah.
And I think if you are an evangelist, if you have a desire to want to share the gospel, being a bishop's a great job, because doors open for you that never opened for me when I was a parish priest.
No.
Opportunities emerge. So I've really enjoyed being a bishop on the whole. But isn't that true of any job? There's always 10% of it, which is ghastly.
Yeah. Yeah, that echoes very much what Bishop Philip North told me when I interviewed him at Christmas. He missed the day-to-day kind of ministry of being a vicar, but the opportunity.
I miss the belonging.
Yeah,
I miss the belonging. You're not meant to be a Christian on your own. And although as a bishop, I've worked hard to create community wherever I've been, it's not the same as, most bishops. Well, I certainly have the experience on many Sundays, when I drive back from a church, with having had a really good time, thinking, oh, I wish I was part of that community.
Mm. Yeah.
But I'm sure with a lot of these, if you are the parish priest, you're probably you probably wish you didn't have to live with them every day. But yeah, I loved being a parish priest, and I can honestly say, I know lots of bishops say this, but it's honestly true that I know that when I when I do hang up my mitre and look back over my ministry, I know the things which will have given me the greatest joy, and if I can use the word pride, were the things I did as a parish priest.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. I think some people would be expecting me to ask a couple of tough questions.
Yeah.
Even so, let's go for it. Away. So, I've had a few phone calls because I've been quite outspoken in my support of same-sex relationships, and crikey, goodness knows what it must be like for the Archbishop. But if we've got this thing, haven't we? This living in love and faith. People in the church might understand that. People outside the church will think, what on earth is Father Alex talking about? This is about a conversation, isn't it? About people, so everybody can kind of chip in. Just tell us a bit about your thoughts about LLF, please.
Yes, well, when I go to sixth forms, which I do quite well in normal times, I do quite a lot. I really enjoy working with young people, and I like the refining fire of young people's questions. When I go to a sixth form to do like a Q&A, you can be sure that the second or third question will always be about, why is the church so homophobic? And quite often I'm embarrassed. They often also ask, why is the church so racist? And I'm embarrassed about that as well. And so, speaking very personally, I am determined to try to make a difference and to use the position and influence I have to make the church a much more welcoming place for all people, including LGBTI plus people. There is no place for homophobia in the church, and we must name it as the sin that it is. There is, however, a difficult debate about how that welcome to LGBTI plus people should be expressed and whether that should include the blessing of same-sex unions or even indeed same-sex marriage. The living in love and faith process is a conversation the church is having with itself, which I believe and pray will lead to what are the appropriate boundaries we can put around our disagreements. So in other words, another way of putting it would be, we need to improve the quality of our disagreement.
Yeah.
Because I'd love to think we all agree with each other, but I think that's unlikely. So therefore, a better thing to do is to say, how can we learn to live with our disagreements, and what are the boundaries? And my hope is that we will draw those boundaries in such a way that LGBTI plus people will feel and experience a greater welcome within the church. And I'm committed to trying to make that process work, whatever people's opinions are.
Yeah. And I suppose some people would want to know your view, but your view can't change the church, can it? So in some ways...
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as a bishop, part of the deal of being a bishop is that you are called to be a focus of unity in a church where there is disagreement.
Yeah.
So it's not that I don't have views, not that I won't say my views. And I will say very clearly that homophobia, racism, these are sinful. And there can be no place for them in the church. That is where we set the boundary. But I recognise that with our history and our tradition, there are different views, not on whether gay and lesbian people should be welcome in the church, but how do we give expression to that welcome? And my commitment is to find what is the very best way of expressing that welcome. And therefore, me saying what I think as the person who really is called, as it were, to hold the chair and hold the unity right now is not the most helpful thing to do. But as I'm sure you will pick up and others will pick up from what I'm saying is, my hope is that we can find a way of giving greater welcome to LGBTI plus people. And I am ashamed of some of our failings in the past, well, and indeed in the present on all of this.
Yeah. Do you think we will in our lifetime see same-sex relationships blessed in a church of England? Or do you think that's
I mean, the honest answer is, Alex, I don't know where this conversation is going to lead us at the moment. But I am committed to the conversation, and I'm also committed to the principle of living with conscientious disagreements, within agreed boundaries. And if you look at another contentious issue in the Church of England, or which still is contentious, but we found a way of living with it, would be the ordination of women, of which I have been a supporter and continue to cherish and celebrate the fact that the priesthood and the episcopate is now open to everybody. But for most of my ministry, that wasn't the case. But the reason we've made progress is because we found a way of living together with our disagreements. So there are priests and bishops who would disagree with me on this issue.
Yeah.
But we have found a way of honouring one another and recognising a legitimate diversity in love and service. And so that's my hope for this issue, that we'll find a similar way forward.
Yeah. I feel like I want to ask you a tough question, so I'm going to. Maybe you can help me, because I have a curate in a same-sex relationship. I've received phone calls castigating me for supporting that, and as the leader of the flock, I should repent and I should get help. I find it very difficult to argue back, really. I just felt that I was in a position where I couldn't win the argument as far as they were concerned. And the only way would be to repent of that, what I'm doing. How would you encourage other clergy who might be feeling that stress and pressure as well?
Well, I'm not sure I've got a lot of wisdom, but I'll tell you what I say to myself. I believe that all of us will be held to account. I'm actually a very conservative Christian. So I believe there is a reckoning. And there will be a day when, as it were, I meet God face to face and I'm held to account for my stewardship of the church in all the different ministries I've had. And I know that I will have got it wrong. I know that I will have made mistakes. My prayer is that when I stand before God, having got things wrong, and I can see clearly where I've gone wrong, God will say to me, Stephen, you got it wrong.
Mm.
But I hope he'll say to me, Stephen, you got it wrong. You were too generous. Not, Stephen, you got it wrong. You were too strict. So I look to Jesus. I look to Jesus and his generosity, his compassion, his mercy, his readiness to go the second mile. And when I find myself in these very difficult situations, here I don't mean to sound judging of others, but that's how I try to be.
Yeah.
I try to be as generous as I can.
That's really helpful. That is helpful. Thank you. Stephen, can I just move on to COVID? I think it's been an extraordinary year, and some people will have grasped opportunities that have come out of COVID, as well as all the bad stuff. But now we're kind of heading for light at the end of the tunnel. Do you think there's an expectation or maybe even a misunderstanding that everybody's going to start coming to church now COVID's over? I mean, we talked about, our online presence, for example, has gone through the roof since we've opened the doors. That hasn't turned out to be as fruitful, where they're piled in the hope that we thought they might do, or maybe we didn't think they might do. We just maybe hoped they might do. So I suppose, what's your hope for the church as we come out of COVID for churches that are maybe in a bit of a quandary about what to do next? Do we throw our resource online? Do we try and get more people into church? Just what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the jargon, but the phrase which gets used is a hybrid future. And I think that's probably quite a helpful way of thinking about it. Your story is replicated 1,000 times up and down the land of churches who have experienced growth through online services and other online communities. Of course, we hope that people will come to church because, not least, the sacramental life of the church is central to the life of the church, and we haven't yet found a way of doing that online, and probably never will, or certainly not in the near future. So I long for people to come to church and for us to enjoy actual human community. But probably a lot of the people who've joined us online, that isn't going to happen for all sorts of reasons. Therefore, I think it's vitally important that we maintain our online presence as much as we are able to, and look for opportunities to help people discover church in other ways. Nor should we underestimate how deeply attractive online church is for many people. I've enjoyed it myself. There's been times on a Sunday morning where I've, made a cup of tea, come back to bed and gone to church, just with the laptop on your lap, and it's rather nice.
Yeah.
And I've noticed when I've been doing online church, I have all the faces on the screen. I like all the faces on the screen because I like seeing what other people are doing, going off to make a cup of tea, very obviously doing something else, or what people are wearing. There they are, in their pajamas. I kind of like all that. It's very human.
Yeah.
And so it's much easier to dip into that kind of church. And in life, I have my dark moments, but ever the optimist, or perhaps I should say full of hope and joy in the gospel. I kind of say you should always put your problems into two piles. And one of the piles is nice problem to have. And I would encourage the clergy in particular to say, this is a nice problem.
Yeah.
The problem is that we've got all these people who've kind of joined us online, and we don't quite know how to nurture them into full discipleship. What a nice problem to have.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. it's rejuvenating, I think, for many people. It's kind of, well, what can we do? Let's, gets the,
and the creativity.
yeah.
I want to, I get a bit frustrated because I think, there's been some things in the press which have been very, very negative about the Church of England, and therefore by implication, sometimes quite specifically about me and the Archbishop of Canterbury. And although sometimes I think, well, you just have to take that on the chin, sometimes I think it's been so unfair, because actually the Church of England, I think, has done so well in the past year. And by that, I mean the parishes. Incredible creativity, incredible resilience and flexibility, incredible rediscovery of pastoral care and just doing fantastic things well. And I was, like many people, deeply moved by your own example in this. The thing that happened on the BBC, whenever it was it before Christmas, whenever it was, you were weeping, Alex, because of your love and service to the people you serve. I want you to know, I sat and watched that and I wept, because it was so beautiful. And so therefore, when people knock the Church of England, I don't mind them knocking me. Well, I'd rather they didn't, but I take that. But when you knock the Church of England, have you seen what we're doing in some of the poorest communities in this land? And how I wish we had more resource to do more of that, but actually we are committed to sustaining that. It is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I have so much pride, not that piece aside, but in what others are doing as well. In every town, in every corner of Lancashire and Yorkshire, it's going on. And I can only agree with you. I think it's unfair, and
yeah, exactly. It just kind of, then I read some sort of sniffy letter or column and think, nobody's taken the trouble to actually go and see what's happening in the vast majority of our parishes.
Yeah. Thanks again. Now then, how's the book sales going?
Well, I don't know. I am writing is a huge part of my life.
Yeah.
And all I've said to many people, I wrote more books before, or wrote just as many books before they were published as I have done since they've been published. It's just kind of deep inside me. I write and I write and I write. I suppose one day I'll stop. But my joy and commitment is in the writing. Once I finish writing it, I have very little interest in it, which is slightly annoying for the publishers. But people seem to buy them and seem to read them, and the publishers keep wanting to publish another one. So,
this new one, Stephen, tell people who aren't aware of it a little bit about it.
I've written a book called Dear England, which is basically a letter to England, and it was based around a chance conversation with a young woman at Paddington Station, who I was, she just, I was buying a coffee and she sort of accosted me, looked me up and down and said, "What made you become a priest?" And I told her God, I thought, cut to the chase. And then I said, and I want to change the world, because, William Temple, Basil Jellicoe, that's what shaped me. I want to make a difference in the world. So we got chatting, but of course I had to catch my train. She had to catch hers. There wasn't time. She initiated the conversation, not me. And so on the train, I thought, if only, like you do with these conversations, if only I should have said that. If only we'd had more time to say the other. And so I thought about writing her a letter, but of course I didn't know her name even, let alone where she lived. So in that moment, the book was born because she kind of personified, embodied for me where so many people are, not atheists, good people who perhaps never really heard much about the Christian faith, never really been to church, but they've got a longing inside them. And so she, for me, became England, and I've written her a letter. And the letter's really saying the Christian way of living life is a joyful, good way. It can make a difference to your life and make a difference to the world.
Yeah. Stephen, I wasn't, I didn't come to church till I was 40. I'm 51 now. And I remember the vicar, he's retired, lovely chap I kept in touch with. He said to me, he said in a sermon, to become a Christian, you've got to be prepared to give your life to Jesus. And at that time, as somebody who wasn't a church regular, I found that really kind of off-putting, actually. It was like,
Yeah.
whoa, hang on. I like the building, I like what I see, but actually giving my life to Jesus. Obviously, I've subsequently done that. But as we come to the end of this interview, Stephen,
Yeah.
how can people take that as a positive? You know, how, as you said, it's a wonderful experience. I love being a Christian. I love being a vicar. I love having a relationship with Jesus. But for people on the outside, that's quite a jump, isn't it?
It is, and I think I just think we need to be careful about how we use language here, particularly with people in the church, let alone people outside. So, although I too have given my life to Jesus, that is not the language I would have used with that young woman on Paddington Station.
No.
The language I tend to use is I find myself saying things like, "Do you ever go to bed at night thinking, why did I say that? Why didn't I do the other?" And of course, we all have that experience of replaying the day and thinking, "Oh goodness me, I messed up." What does that mean when you do that? What's happening? What's happening is you're saying to yourself, "I've fallen short of my own standards. I wasn't the person I wanted to be today in those situations." So we all have another word for it is conscience. We all have this kind of standards for ourselves that we don't always meet. And I kind of say, what you see in Jesus is you see this is what human beings are supposed to be like. This is like a model human being who shows us that we're supposed to be generous, we're supposed to be kind, we're supposed to be merciful, supposed to be compassionate. And the other image I use is the image of a heart transplant. You know, I think I'd be a better person if I had a heart that was more like Jesus. So it's not so much, well, I hadn't thought of it this way, but your question makes me think of it this way. It's not so much, first of all, you give your life to Jesus. Will you let Jesus give his life to you? Will you let him put your heart in you? Will you see him as somebody to follow who can show you to be a better person, to be the person you want to be, let alone the person God wants you to be? So that's the kind of language I use to say, look, who am I to tell you what to do? I'm just a follower of Jesus. But look, it's made a bit of a difference to me. It's your decision, but why don't you follow him as well?
Yeah. Stephen, it's been an absolute pleasure meeting you for a start and talking to you. And my prayer, I'm going to ask you to maybe close with a prayer for us all, but my prayer is that when they see you in the position that you are as the Archbishop of York, an extremely serious, important position, they also see a real human being, a down-to-earth gentleman that's kind of been there, got the t-shirt, and is just like the rest of us. And I think sometimes people, when they think about the church, they don't see that. They see piety and stiffness and Middle England. And so I hope that when you are watching the Godcasts and you see Archbishop Stephen, hopefully you see some of that. And in seeing some of that, you might see something that is attractive and may encourage you to come and say hello to your local church and meet some of the local people, because there are plenty of us like Stephen, and there's plenty who aren't like us, but there are plenty of people who are real earthy, wonderful people. So Stephen, thank you so much, and thanks for your time. So would you be happy to say a prayer for us as we?
Of course, Alex, and it's been real pleasure to be on this, and may God bless you in this work that you do, but the work you do in your parish. And I hope people will be encouraged to see that in Christ there is another way of being human, which is full of joy. So, loving God, may your blessing be upon our nation, our church, and all who are watching this Godcast, that they may hear in this conversation God's gracious invitation for them to enjoy a fullness of life and the promise of hope and peace. For we ask it through Jesus Christ, our Saviour and our friend. Amen.
Amen. at that point, my dogs start barking, which is perfect timing.
Yeah.
And I do hope that when your head hits the pillow this evening, Stephen, you reflect on this as one of the good Zoom discussions today. And it's been a real joy.
Absolutely assure you I will, Alex. I mean, I think it's also about the nature of Zoom. I think Zoom works quite well for a chat like this or for a small group. It's when it gets to a big meeting, I find I can't always, my concentration goes. I'm fiddling around doing other things.
That's very reassuring to hear.
Yeah, but God bless you.
And you as well, Father. Thank you so much. God bless.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.